Hello everyone, it's Heidi here with the newest episode of Unleashed. We're going to dive into co-parenting with the government, or how we'd rather not do that. Tesla CEO Elon Musk recently called upon parents to protect their children from this woke ideology. Time for parents to fight back, the billionaire wrote on Twitter on July 9th in response to a TikTok video posted by an irate father. America's woke indoctrination is happening everywhere, in education, healthcare, politics, and in the private sector. Today, we'll focus on how our kids' healthcare has been weaponized in this culture war through the schools, actually. A couple weeks ago, my daughter turned 14. That same day, I received an email from her pediatric office that I was not allowed to see her medical records anymore because of her age, except for the bill, of course. I called them to ask why they were doing this. They blamed it on the federal HIPAA law, and honestly, they didn't really blame it on much. They just said that's the way it goes. But there is no law that requires them to cut parents out at age 14. They were being misleading. Obviously, I'm firing my pediatrician. Here's what HIPAA says. Parents of minor children are usually considered personal representatives under HIPAA, granting them access to their child's medical records and giving them the authority to make healthcare decisions on their behalf. However, certain situations exist where a parent is not automatically recognized as a personal representative, like when a minor consents to care without requiring parental consent. So basically, whenever a minor wants care, they don't have to tell their parents. It's that vague and encompassing. HIPAA, the federal guidelines, also defer to state law on parental access to medical records, and it defers to healthcare providers. They can use their professional judgment following state law to allow or deny parental access to medical records. So make darn sure you trust your doctor. In Colorado, kids at age 12 can consent to certain medical treatments, such as contraceptive services and treatment for sexual offenses. Parental notification might be required for procedures like abortions and treatment for substance use disorders, but they just have to be notified. Parents can't stop them. Kids age 12 or older can also seek outpatient psychotherapy without parental consent. So if your child is 12 or older, Polis and the Dems have changed the law to say that kids are in charge, not you, parents, which really means you're co-parenting with the government and your doctor and your teacher and maybe even unlicensed folks from politically charged nonprofits that work in the schools or work in your healthcare system. So as school starts and school physicals happen, I want parents and grandparents and caregivers to be prepared. Since the feds defer to states on this, let's start with a look at the onerous Colorado state laws, including some new ones this last session that are radical and aggressively eliminating parents' rights here. Colorado, or specifically Jared Polis and the Democrats in charge, have been leading the way on this attack, since Jared started his political career by buying a seat on the State Board of Education back in 2000. So fast forward a decade when a little talked about law passed in 2013. The state legislature established a grant program for comprehensive human sex education, where curriculum was not allowed to emphasize sexual abstinence as the primary or sole acceptable preventative method available to students. Nope, you got to have sex. That's crazy. And if pregnancy outcomes are discussed, they must discuss abortion. This is with kids, little kids in some cases. Schools that accepted this funding had to use curriculum that was culturally relevant. Boy, is that a loose, loaded term. What does that even mean? A year after that, in 2014, A Queer Endeavor was launched, a group out of CU Boulder's Department of Education that, according to their website, has made great strides towards its mission to contribute to the knowledge base on gender and sexual diversity affirming policies and practices in education, also to inform research and praxis and engage in broad-based coalition building with a variety of community-based stakeholders. Phew! They estimate that they've trained more than 6,000 Colorado teachers on how to queer the curriculum and how to deal with problematic parents. So, guys, my twins were in first grade in Boulder Valley Public Schools back in 2018 when they got to experience this curriculum firsthand. They were shown videos teaching them it was mean to assume that someone was a boy or girl, that they could be any sex they wanted, And then the school hosted a play depicting a bird getting a sex change. Yeah, that was it. Needless to say, we moved schools along with about 30 other families. And not because any of us are transphobic, for goodness sake. It's because the school hid these teachings from us parents. And it was totally inappropriate subject matter for my first graders. Even the kindergartners were there. But little did I know that we were some of the first families nationally to deal with this new phenomenon, and the first to take a stand against this progressive movement to sexualize our little ones. Yep, it started in Boulder, Colorado. Shortly after this happened in Boulder, in the next session of the Colorado legislature, led by their new governor, Jared Polis, they kept the momentum going by passing an aggressive law in 2019 to force how sex education was taught in our schools. HB 19-1032 was a Trojan horse coming for our kids. The bill eliminated concessions made in the 2013 grant program and explicitly prohibited the discussion of religious, moral, and ethical perspectives on sex in the classroom. It forbid the emphasis on abstinence and sexual risk avoidance as the only foolproof methods against pregnancy and STDs. The bill removed the autonomy of teachers, administrators, and school boards to choose the content of their comprehensive sex education curriculums and mandated adherence to its requirements. HB 1032 has raised concerns about the restriction of teacher speech, the erosion of parental rights, and the infringement on religious freedom within the classroom. The law aims to prevent any mention of abstinence as the best and healthiest choice for teenagers, despite the fact that many American teens do choose abstinence. Very few states prohibit discussions of religious beliefs about sex, while Colorado's law goes further by explicitly banning abstinence-related speech. The law also requires teachers who discuss pregnancy outcomes like adoption and parenting to also cover abortion. Planned Parenthood's comprehensive sex education materials align with the requirements of HB 1032. They are the significant advocate for such laws across the nation. A contentious aspect of the law is the mandate to teach elementary school students about the definition of consent. Parents have expressed confusion and concern about how teaching consent to little ones could protect children from potential harm, especially since young children may not fully understand the implications of saying yes. HB 1032 limited discourse on abstinence, mandated discussions of abortion, and raised questions about the role of sex education in schools, parental rights, and the interests of our kids' well-being. Parents should always come first, period. Also passed and signed by Polis in 2019 was a law that forbid doctors and mental health professionals from engaging in what's known as conversion therapy. This means any counseling or conversations that address changing an individual's sexual orientation, including efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions or to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attraction or feelings towards the individuals of the same sex. The law prohibits any conversation between individuals and their chosen counselor that seeks to help their client achieve comfort with his or her biological sex. The argument against these bans is that the government doesn't belong in a counselor's office, and these bans could very well be a violation of both freedom of speech and religious freedom. It's moving through the court system. Then, of course, in 2021 and 2022, COVID overreach by our government leaders did a number on parental rights, basically forcing kids to get an experimental vaccine in order to play sports, to travel, to go to school, and do school activities. I was a regent at CU during that time, and the bureaucrats there were relentless. No exceptions for anyone, even if they were religious or medical exemptions. Now, our kids are paying the consequences as myocarditis and other medical problems are surfacing, not to mention all the social and mental health problems. And there's a good chance that a lot of this is related to the vaccine. Many health freedom groups evolved during COVID to push back against this. Lots of parents spoke out too, 6,000 of them in the Jeffco Kids First Facebook group, in fact. These parents are still engaged and using their voice to stand up for parents' rights. They have a gala coming up on August 31st that I'd love for you to come. Join me. Come meet my fellow moms and dads on a mission. Go to jeffcokidsfirst.com to get tickets. The fight continues and we need you to be a part of it, especially if you live in Jefferson County. So, after the haze of COVID cleared, Polis and his gang of government thugs were back at it, with more attacks on our parental rights. Enter HB 23-1003. It's a sneaky mental health screening administered by the Public Health and Environment Department through the schools for 6th through 12th grade. The law says that a student 12 years of age or older can agree to participate in the mental health screening even if the student's parent opts them out. We're going to put a link to this survey because it is crazy, some of the things they ask about the kids and their parents and their families and how we run our lives and our families. So then the law requires a screener to notify the student's parents if they find that additional treatment is needed after reviewing the student's mental health screening results. I'm having a hard time finding the requirements to be a screener and evaluate our kids' mental health, but I do know they are not typically licensed mental health professionals. I'm sure nothing could go wrong here, right? The bill authorizes the department to promulgate rules as necessary to implement and administer the program, or basically make up the rules as they go. If all this isn't reason enough to run your child out of the public school system and your local pediatrician's office, wait, there's more. Things are about to get worse. Elections have consequences, and a governor that doesn't have to worry about getting reelected can be downright dangerous. Jared Polis copies Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, any chance he gets. Let's look at what's happening there to see what's coming for us here in Colorado. California legislation, AB 957, requires parents to affirm their children's belief in being the opposite sex. And if you don't go along as a parent, you can lose your child. The California Senate Judiciary passed AB 957, which would consider it abusive for a parent to not affirm a child's gender identity, and it would deny custody to non-affirming parents during custody disputes. This legislation infringes upon the fundamental rights of parents to make decisions regarding the upbringing and well-being of their own children. Parents have a natural and constitutional right to guide their children's development according to their own values and beliefs. By penalizing parents who do not affirm their child's self-perceived gender identity, the state is overstepping its authority and undermining the autonomy of families. Secondly, the legislation is based on the assumption that young children possess the cognitive ability to fully understand and articulate their gender identity. The bill's sponsor herself acknowledged that children as young as 7 can make such determinations. However, it's widely recognized in child development psychology that young children are still in the process of forming their identities and are highly susceptible to external influences. Enforcing a legal requirement for parents to affirm their child's gender identity at such a young age is premature, and it will likely lead to irreversible consequences. Look at all the kids detransitioning. Moreover, the law fails to consider the growing body of evidence questioning the effectiveness and safety of gender-affirming care. The law's proponents argue that affirming gender dysphoria is necessary to address mental health concerns and prevent suicide among transgender individuals. However, numerous studies have shown that medical interventions, such as hormone treatments and surgeries with kids that young, do not significantly improve mental health outcomes or reduce the risk of suicide. In fact, some studies indicate that transgender individuals who undergo surgical transition have a higher risk of suicide compared to the general population. So the jury is still out. It is concerning that the legislation ignores these findings and promotes a one-size-fits-all approach to gender identity affirmation. Additionally, the legislation disregards the potential harm and regret that can arise from medical interventions for gender transition. There are numerous accounts of individuals, including parents, who regret undergoing such procedures and suffer long-term physical and psychological consequences. By mandating affirmation and potentially opening the door to medical interventions, the legislation puts vulnerable kids at risk without fully considering the potential ramifications. Furthermore, the lack of clarity and definition within the law is deeply problematic. The bill fails to provide a clear understanding of what constitutes non-affirming behavior or how it would be determined. This ambiguity opens the door for subjective interpretations and potential misuse, allowing anyone, including progressive activist organizations, to make claims of child abuse against parents based on their own biases and agendas. Overall, the California legislation, AB 957, is an unprecedented assault on parental rights and a dangerous overreach by the state into family matters. It disregards the complexities of child development, ignores the limitations and risks of gender-affirming care, and fails to provide adequate protection for the well-being of children and the rights of parents. It is crucial to oppose this law in Colorado to keep it from spreading and to protect the rights and best interests of families and children all over America. Colorado, you're next. You've got to keep an eye on this. So what are some other things happening in California that's starting to happen in Colorado schools? Well, number one, mandatory curriculum that teaches children that they can choose whether they are a boy, girl, neither, both, despite a legal requirement to be medically accurate and no discussion of what a transition entails when they do talk about it. Number two, schools are providing on-site counseling or coaching to children with no parental notification or consent, usually by bringing in nonprofits for added programming and student clubs like GSA. Number three, schools are using confidential gender care plans and student support plans to change student records to reflect new names, new pronouns, and support plans for kids with no notification of parents. Ask my friend Erin Lee about that, or listen to my very first podcast where I interview Erin about what happened to her daughter. Number four, kids are going through school-facilitated transition groups where they obtain off-label blockers and hormone replacement medications from adults who believe they are helping without parents knowing. The side effects of these medications are very serious and can be irreversible. So, now that I've completely freaked out most of you, what is a parent or grandparent to do? Here are some very specific tactics you can take to protect your child and stop this craziness in Colorado. And remember, you can read these on Substack. There's a link in the post. Generally speaking, vote with your dollar, bankrupt brands that are going against our values and our children and our families, get your kids and grandkids out of schools that are going to the woke side, keep your kids and grandkids' screen time to a minimum and educate them about the danger of drugs, including pot and vaping, Adderall and Xanax, and how fentanyl is everywhere. Surround your kids and grandkids with good influences, including family and friends, coaches, teachers that align with your values. Vet them. Stay in close contact with them. But most importantly, talk to your kids and grandkids constantly and their friends when they're together, and connect with other parents and grandparents. Next, change doctors, coaches, tutors to align with values when you need to. Get in the school and classroom and volunteer, meet the teachers, and build a healthy relationship with the administration. Then join or attend school board meetings, working groups, PTA meetings, district accountability committee meetings, the school accountability committee meetings, and or curriculum review committee meetings. Lots and lots of committees, so be everywhere. Create parent groups and organizations in schools if they don't exist, and flip school boards if they need it. We've got a lot of school board elections coming up in Colorado in just a couple months. These elections matter. Who you vote for matters. Support the right candidates and volunteer to walk and make phone calls. Next, view the curriculum before your child does. All of it. Use your right to the Freedom of Information Act and CORA if you have to. Reach out if you need to know how to do that. And know your rights. Research PPRA, FERPA, FOIA, and district policies. Get your kids out of public schools if they're not doing the right things. You can start a micro school, homeschool, charter schools, public schools that are doing the right things, private schools, religious schools. And ask direct and hard questions like, do you teach gender ideology in the curriculum? Will you involve me if my child expresses gender confusion? Can I volunteer in the classroom? Can I see all the curriculum? Are mental health providers, screeners in your school licensed? What is taught for health or sex ed or social emotional learning? We're going to do a whole episode on SEL. Are there vulgar or pornographic books in the library that are accessible to all students? Does the school district require teachers to attend equity or diversity training? And can you review the training materials? Can you opt your students out of controversial subjects? What clubs are active on your school's campus? And Get on their email list, follow their social media accounts, ask to attend the meetings every once in a while. Does your school have a student newspaper? Subscribe to it. There are often announcements, op-eds, and advertisements in student newspapers that concern a lot of these controversial matters and talk about club activity, how parents and grandparents can stay out of the conversation, or how the kids and students can keep them out of the conversation. Ask your school what the policy is on restrooms, locker rooms, gender identity, and overnight field trips for sports teams. Can a child be released from school for confidential medical services without a parent's knowledge? What is your school policy on parental notification when students socially transition their gender or change their pronouns? Lots of questions to ask your schools to really dig in and figure out what's going on. We're going to detail all those out in the Substack, the written version of this podcast, and there will be a link that you can go to in the social media post. But know that you've got to be assertive and you've got to organize your questions well and really do a deep dive. Finally, support and push for federal and state legislation that protects parents' rights instead of does away with them. Our own Congresswoman Lauren Boebert has advocated for this at Congress a few months ago, but the U.S. Senate wouldn't take it up after it passed in the House. The proposed Parents' Bill of Rights Act seeks to establish and codify various rights for parents and legal guardians regarding their kids' education in publicly funded schools. This legislation, which is passed in the U.S. House, as I said, aims to empower parents by providing access to school curriculum, teaching materials, and other educational resources. The bill also emphasizes parental involvement, transparency, and consent in various aspects of a child's schooling. The act amended the Federal Education and Secondary Education Act of 1965, adding provisions that grant parents and legal guardians the following rights. Number 1, to be able to review curriculum, educational standard changes, and school budgets. Number 2, access a list of books and materials in the school library. Number 3, address the school board and receive information about violent activities that are happening in the schools. Number 4, be informed of plans to eliminate gifted or talented programs. Number 5, meet with teachers twice a year. Number 6, be notified and provide consent for any medical or mental health screenings. Additionally, the Act modifies the 1974 Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act to require parental consent for the use of technology in the classroom and ensure that access to instructional materials are appropriate. It also restricts using student information for non-educational purposes. The legislation empowers parents to enforce these rights against schools receiving federal funding. Key provisions include the right to know what their child is being taught, information about teachers and guest lecturers, access to school records, control over data collection, transparency in school board activities, and awareness of safety situations affecting their child. Parents can also take legal action if schools violate these rights, with potential consequences including reductions in federal education funding for systemic violations. So overall, the Parents' Bill of Rights Act aimed to enhance parental involvement, transparency, and control over their kids' education, while also ensuring safeguards for student safety and data privacy. But we have to win the U.S. Senate back and keep the House in 24 to get this one done. Democrats don't want the bill. They don't want parents to have control of their kids. It's obvious. And here in Colorado, it's been just as hard to pass these Parents' Bill of Rights. Almost every year, the Republicans try and do it. But here's the deal. Polis and Democrat leaders in Colorado, parents already have the right to do a lot that you're not letting them do, even without a memorialized Parents' Bill of Rights in Colorado or nationally. We just need to start reminding you of that in the courts, in the media, and by walking our kids and the funding attached to them out of the union-run schools and the government-coerced pediatric offices. Parents, here are your constitutional and legal rights. And this is thanks to America First Policy Institute. They did a great job of compiling this. Let's start using our rights. We have the right to inspect all instructional materials in connection with any survey, analysis, or evaluation. We have the right to review our children's education records until they turn 18. We have the right to request corrections and contest elements of a student's record they believe to be incorrect. We have the absolute right to make decisions concerning the care, custody, or control of our children. Parents have always had the rights to the responsibility for the education of their children, and states, localities, and private institutions have the primary responsibility for supporting that parental role. Public schools are required to facilitate meaningful consultation with parents. Schools that receive federal funding are not allowed to discriminate based on race, color, and national origin. Parents, not the government, have control over their kids' education and lead school policies that affect our children's mental health. So why is the left so obsessed with taking away our rights as parents? Why are they hell-bent on breaking up families? Well, it's simply about control and power. It's about Marxism. Parental rights are crucial in safeguarding individual freedom and autonomy. Parents are best positioned to make decisions regarding the upbringing, education, and values instilled in their kids. Allowing the government to infringe upon these rights can lead to a loss of personal freedom and the imposition of state-mandated ideologies and beliefs on families. Parents, this is a wake-up call. They are indeed coming for our kids. The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. This mom on a mission is battle ready. Are you? Today's guest is a friend of mine and a warrior on the front lines of fighting for Colorado parents' rights, a fellow mom on a mission, Holly Calvert. I know this has been a long episode, but I think it's really, really important information to have in your toolkit going into school starting. So go back and reread the Substack or re-listen to these laws and rights that you have. And now let's hear from Holly about how you can do that on the front lines as a parent firsthand. Well, Unleashed audience, I'm very excited to welcome a dear friend and a warrior for our kids and for health freedom across Colorado, Holly Calvert. Welcome to the show. I'd love for you to tell people a little bit about how you got here and how you became such an amazing fighter on this front.
Well, hi, Heidi. Nice to see you, and thank you for that. That's really sweet. I started being interested in Colorado politics surrounding the health freedom issue in 2014, and I attended quite a few rallies and legislative hearings where I witnessed the Democrats in Colorado slowly chipping away at parental rights on this issue across the board. And that is a complicated issue. My focus is vaccine rights and vaccine informed consent.
Yes, which, boy, there's been a lot of movement on that front, and you educated me so much on the peril that we face as adults and children, our children, when it comes to vaccine requirements and the lack of transparency and kind of the agenda behind all of it. And this week I posted about a notice I got from my daughter's pediatrician. She turned 14 this week, and immediately afterwards I got a notice saying that I would no longer have access to her medical records, only her billing records as a mom. And I was like, what law says this? And I knew a lot about 1120 and some of the laws that had passed, but I hadn't heard this. And so I started digging in, and I haven't been able to find anything about federal HIPAA laws, which is what the doctor's office blamed it on. But there are a lot of new things happening, starting with vaccines. That could you educate the audience a little bit on why you think they're doing this?
Well, one of the reasons I think is the transgender agenda as a whole. But I also think that this can be abused to get children to be vaccinated behind their parents' backs. So that, like you said, the laws are very shady. I couldn't find anything in Colorado that really allows them to do this, but somehow they're getting away with it. So the big question is why? Why do they want your kid behind closed doors? Why do they not want you seeing those records? What are they doing? And to me, one of the biggest, scariest issues that parents need to be aware of is around age 12, 13, 14, 15, there's quite a few vaccines they want your child to receive. As people find out about vaccine risk, more and more people are choosing to not vaccinate for one or more disease. So they might skip a Gardasil vaccine or a flu shot, right? So say your daughter, I saw what you said about her records being sealed from you. So the first thing that went through my head is, okay, she's in this room and they say, okay, you did not get this or this vaccine, maybe, or maybe you're due for these vaccines. We're going to go ahead and do those today. Is your 14-year-old capable of understanding the risks of the vaccine? Is your 14-year-old capable of saying, hey, no, we're not doing that because of this reason? Maybe you have an allergy to one of them. Maybe you have a religious reason to not do one of these. And I have seen time and time again, the nurse comes into the room and injects them without a conversation, which is against the law.
Wow.
So those are the scary things for me. what's happening behind this door?
What is happening behind these doors? Like, why are they so driven to take control away from parents and drive a wedge between us and our kids? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's part of the whole agenda. It's a huge agenda. They want the government inserted in between you and your children on every level. So they're in the schools, right? They're sending your kid to a mental health professional in the school. Well, prove to me that that mental health professional doesn't have mental health issues themselves.
Yeah.
That's a big one for me. Like, so who are you? Who are you as a legislator to go in and take the government and grab some power and insert the government into my children's lives? And what they're doing with this is they're using the medical industry to insert the government in between you and your child, taking your child, grooming them, telling them, hey, you're 14 now, you can make your own decisions. Don't tell your parents.
Yeah, especially when it comes to reproductive care and mental health issues. And it seems like what they're doing is they're using mental health as a catch-all for all kinds of issues and things that they can talk to our kids about and get them to, decide a certain way. I mean, I think that their goal is really to give kids freedom at age 12 in Colorado to make all decisions themselves around medical care, which is crazy. I can't imagine the work and the care that we put in as parents to raise our kids to be aligned with our values, to be aligned with our desires around, their body, their health, and their decisions around reproductive care. And then to shut the door and leave us out and say, you don't get to know what's happening is it makes me crazy.
And just on a developmental level, children are not capable. They are absolutely not capable of comprehending risk. It's just not a thing for them. And we could look into that, and you're going to see a lot of suggestions in the psychology world that they can't comprehend risk until they're 25 even. So a 14-year-old cannot make an informed medical decision for themselves and understand the risk and reward or versus reward. And who is the person who has to deal with that consequence? Well, you are. So if your child's given a treatment, or if your child is talked into taking a prescription, whatever, you're the one who has to deal with the consequence. But if you're not even aware of what that is, say they took a vaccine and they had a reaction, but you weren't informed about it, how are you supposed to identify the reaction and report it? And that could go with anything. And I'm confused about this too, because I want to know, when they send the bill later, what's that going to look like? Is it just going to say your daughter's name and her appointment with nothing else on there? What if you need to fill out a prescription for her? Do you not have access to know what that is? Because you're the one driving her to get the prescription filled. You're the one who would go do that, right? So if you're locked out of her medical records, how are you supposed to do that? What's that going to look like?
That's what I'm confused about. That's a really good point. And Holly, I want you to talk a little bit about the health freedom movement overall in Colorado. Are you guys feeling, I consider myself part of it, but are we deflated? Are we encouraged? Are we mad? Are we like, how are we going to turn this around? Because in Colorado, it feels like we've just gotten a lot of our rights taken away. And you guys have fought so hard on many fronts and kept it from being much worse than it is. But what are the next steps? How do we keep people engaged?
So from my viewpoint, we're still in the same situation we've been in for a while, trying to get parents to understand that there's an issue at all. Most people are not aware. So I do see more and more people saying, you know what, I might not get this one vaccine, but I'm being told that I have to go through this re-education Nazi style propaganda video to get my exemption. Is that true? And then we tell them, yes, that law changed in 2020. We fought it as hard as we could. We fought it for years. They tried to push it through for a decade before they got it done. So on their end, they say, you still have your exemptions. We're just tracking you in a database with the database inside of it, and maybe a mystery one on top of that. Lots of people have access to it, but we don't know who. So there's a whole privacy issue with that. If everybody who works for CDPHG has access to this, then your child's medical information is not safe in that route. So it's kind of ironic, right? If you file a vaccine exemption, say just for chickenpox, you vaccinate for everything else, but your child had chickenpox naturally, you're not going to do that vaccine. You have to fill out this form now. It goes into the government database, and all these other people might have access to it. But at the same time, you can't see your daughter's medical records at her appointment. So how does that make any sense? The government is the parent. And that's the overall point. That's the agenda. That's what they're doing across the board. Chipping away at your parental rights little by little until the government owns your kids.
Holly, what's happening with the I know the importance of having religious exemption, and that they're trying to do away with that and just say non-medical exemption so that parents can't sue or use First Amendment rights to be able to protect their decision making around that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so now Colorado has a medical and non-medical exemption, and the non-medical underneath it is religious and philosophical. But the way they worded it stops, like you said, lawsuits from happening, because what happened in New York and New Jersey, people wanted to sue for the removal of their religious rights, especially in New Jersey, and that didn't work out for the legislature there at all. So what happened is across the board, California, Colorado, Democrats in all these states figured out a way around it. So now we have medical and non-medical, which for the last 30 years, we had philosophical, religious, and medical.
So if you're a parent listening right now and you want to advocate for your child and you want to be on the front lines of their healthcare decisions at school and in the doctor's office, what are some simple things they can do or pay attention to just be more aware and engaged in the decision-making process?
So overall, you're going to want to fight this with your doctor's office. Really, you need to go in there and say, hey, what's going on? Can I come to my child's appointment? Can I come in the room? And really just work with that practitioner. And if it's somebody who is like, no, absolutely not, you can't come in the room, you can't be at your child's appointment, you can't do any of these things, really parents need to find alternatives to that. So sports physicals are a good example. In Colorado, sports physicals and school physicals can be done by chiropractors. And that's what I recommend.
I did not know that. That's a great piece of information. And then as far as vaccinations go, what are parents' rights around that right now?
Okay, so that gets a little sticky. So the 1986 Act, it's the childhood immunization law that is a federal umbrella, okay? It requires that every time a child gets a vaccine, the parent must be given a vaccine information sheet, and the parent has to have a notice where they give kind of a form of consent. They don't call it consent, but the parent. So let's just run through a scenario. So say for your doctor's office, say your daughter goes in and she's in this medical appointment and you don't have any access to that, right? Federally, they are supposed to come out to you and say, hey, Heidi, we would like to give her these vaccines today. Here's the vaccine information sheet for each one. And then you kind of give a form of consent with that, right? Mm-hmm. How is that going to happen in the scenario where you're locked out of her appointments, where you can't go in the room with her, where you have no access to her medical records at all? And I can read you some of exactly the words if you want.
Sure.
What that says. So it says, the mandatory instructions for use of the VIS, the vaccine information sheet, require providers to make a notion in the patient's medical record or permanent office log regarding provision of the VIS. So basically, they acknowledge that you are, as the parent, are supposed to be consenting to this. So in my view, that conflicts with the fact that you've been locked out of your child's medical records.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, well, it doesn't make sense, but I understand what you're saying.
There's just like a little thing in there. It's like, okay, well, I'm not allowed to do these things with her anymore because she's 14, but how are you going to get my consent under federal law where you're supposed to give me this vaccine information sheet? You're supposed to have a little bit of consent from me. And you can find a lot more information on that at nvic.org. It's the National Vaccine Information Center, which is who I contact to get a lot of information whenever I'm vague on things. And Teresa Rangham, she's our director here in Colorado. She's very helpful and she gave me information on this. Always gives great information, but their website is great. That's nvic.org if anyone wants to find more information. But I just see a lot of conflict with vaccine law, a lot of loopholes, a lot of different ways that this can be abused. And you see all the time news articles, like one not too long ago I saw, there was a little boy, a child, I think 4 years old, sexually assaulted in the dentist's office because their parent wasn't back there with them. Things like that do happen. So in my view, the parent needs to be involved in all of these decisions. You should never let your child go to an appointment alone.
Holly, what do you say when the naysayers or the folks that get defensive about this say, well, what if your child doesn't feel comfortable talking to you about reproductive care or mental health issues? They need a private consult with their doctor or nurse practitioner to be able to talk, or a mental health school counselor to talk about this stuff.
I tell them it's an overreach of the government. It's not the government's job.
Yeah.
At all. It's not the government's job. The government is supposed to do what the Constitution tells them to do. And that's it, nothing else. Everything the federal government does should be listed in the Constitution. That's what they're allowed to do, period. Everything else defers to the states. So in my view, they can argue that all day long. It's not the government's job. It's not the government's job to raise my kids or insert themselves into my life, or your life, or anyone else's.
That is a beautiful way to end this conversation, Holly. I so appreciate you coming on and giving us some insights. If people want to get in touch with you or want to join this movement to push back on a lot of this stuff, what do you recommend?
So start with nvic.org and sign up for the advocacy portal. And then you will have inside access. If any laws come up, if there are any bills, any hearings, you will get an email. That's how I got started. When I started questioning vaccines in 2008, I signed up for NVIC advocacy, and then I got an email in 2014 that said, "Hey, there's this bill," and I thought, well, I'm going to head down there and see what this is all about. And this is a really interesting story on this, actually. So I knew nothing about politics. I knew that I was interested in the subject, so I go down to the Capitol, and in this hearing, they were talking about the tracking database and parents giving equal effort. Their argument was a very socialistic ideal in general. And they said, we need to make sure that these parents who are not vaccinating put in equal effort. And some legislators said, what do you mean equal effort? What exactly are you talking about? And they said, well, we put in a lot of effort going to the doctor's office to get our kids vaccinated. They need to put in effort. We need to make them watch a mandatory re-education video. We need to make them jump through hoops, right? And we said, a lot of the people testifying said, this is not your business. You are legislators, you are our neighbors, you are elected to sit here and, kind of protect us from the government, not stick yourselves and stick the government in our private business. This is not your decision. And I remember very clearly a Democrat legislator, she said, point blank, our constituents elect us because they know we are smarter than them. What? And they know that we can make these decisions better than they can.
Oh my gosh.
And that was the moment for me. I looked around and I just was like, did everybody else just hear her? She just said, you're stupid. And you voted for her because you're dumb and she's smarter than you. And you elected her to make these decisions because you know that she's smart and you're not. That is straight up what she said at the Colorado State Capitol in this hearing.
And Holly, how's that working out for them?
Exactly. So that's what they think. They think, maybe there's a bad parent out there. And the bill sponsor, Daphne Michelson-Janae, of one of the bills we were talking about, 1911-20, that's her viewpoint. We say, hey, parents can make these decisions for their kids. And they say, not all parents are good parents. So as legislators, they believe it's their job to go in and get rid of your rights so that one parent who's not good enough, they say, to take care of their own child, they can do something about that one parent. So they're willing to dump your rights down the drain because they think they're helping that child. But you know what really gets me? We need to help these children. We need to help them with their mental health. We need to help them with their choices. But let's get everybody getting abortions and get rid of the babies. So on one hand, you're saying, we need to help your children. We need to help your children. And on the other, they're saying, kill your babies. How does that make sense?
It doesn't.
Because it's all population control, all of it. So behind that closed door, they're talking to your kids about their gender. They're talking to them about sex changes. And I think that that's where we're headed.
Yeah, I'm worried about that too, Holly. And I am just so appreciative of all the work you're doing and really just enjoy our friendship and have so much admiration for the fight you've joined and continue your great work. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. And I appreciate you too and everything. It was so good to see you.
Thanks, Holly.